Good afternoon, everybody. If you can just make your way in for what should be a cracking session on a number of different fronts. Very, very pleased indeed to be introducing today a very important organisation in the transformation and regeneration and repurposing of our town centres, towns and cities across the UK, Homes England. Simon has given his time to explain a bit more to our industry about what they can do for us and what we can do for them. I know you're going to find this innovative, interesting, because my perception of what Homes England were there to deliver and how they can work with us was completely wrong before I started speaking to Simon. So in the nicest possible way, I hope you lot are also equally as wrong, so that you can learn from this and hopefully take away from Simon's presentation ways we can move forward and collaborate by bringing residential into our town centres. We're going to follow that up with a panel session, which I'll be adjudicating. It's a question time style debate where I have friends in the audience who have questions, which Simon will be joining us for as well. So I'll hand it over to Simon DeVere, General Manager for Homes England.
Thank you. Don't clap yet, you haven't heard it. Right, so Simon DeVere, General Manager of Acquisitions, or Director of Acquisitions as I'm now called, for Homes England. Apologies in advance, I'm from government, so PowerPoint presentation of 97 slides is called for. A couple of things. Steve mentioned a few things in his speech. He mentioned place. He mentioned no silos. He mentioned innovative ideas, collaboration, strategic thinking, thinking big, and the need for change. Hopefully this presentation will demonstrate to you all that Homes England is very much in that space as well. And just for the record, I know I'm part of Whitehall, but we do have a regional presence across England, including Liverpool, so we are physically here as well as in spirit. So just a few quotes there. I'll not read them all. No pressure, eh? I like the one that says Homes England to go where the market won't. More on that later, but that's precisely what we're here to do. We're not here to duplicate and replicate. We're here to complement and supplement. So what are we not? Well, we're not a property speculator. We're not a regeneration agency either. And we're not a house builder. So what are we and what do we do? We are the government's delivery agency. Fundamental shift from a regeneration agency. As I say, we don't complement, or rather we do complement and we don't duplicate or replicate. And we are there to facilitate that others do, to deliver the 300,000 homes a year that this country is calling out for. I don't know whether anybody in the room's read our strategic plan. It is actually quite a good read. You can get it online. I suggest you do read it, because it sets out quite clearly the ambition of the agency. It's also quite important because it goes beyond the spending review. It's the first strategic plan of the agency that does that. So actually it sets out very clearly our ambition to how we can facilitate the delivery of 300,000 homes. But clearly, we're not a development company, we're not a house builder, we can't do it on our own. And our mission is to intervene directly of areas of greatest need and improve affordability. That plays across various parts of real estate, including town centres. I'm a land guy. Land is land. It doesn't matter whether it's a town centre piece of land or a Ministry of Defence airfield. Issues are slightly different, but the thinking's still the same, where there's demonstrable market failure and a clear rationale for Homes England to intervene and support the market. When you read our strategic plan, you'll see that there are some certain objectives there. I'll not go through them all, but I will pick out a couple. The bottom middle, where we'll offer expert support for priority locations. The agency is changing in a number of ways. We've changed our mission from regeneration to delivery. But we're also growing in terms of our expertise. I joined the agency just over 12 months ago. We had under 700 people in the agency. Last count this morning, we were just over 1,000. We will be growing to 1,400 in the next 12 months or so doubling the size of the agency. And that's with, I'll come from the MOD as well, so MOD speaks SQEPT individuals, suitably qualified and experienced personnel, of bringing in those property expertise to support the agency deliver its vision and its mission. So we can be much more the intelligent client and ask the intelligent questions. We don't know all the answers, but we like to think we know most of the questions. And the range of investment and products, we're already doing that and working with partners. We need to be doing more of it so that we can support the government's housing agenda. Whether it's this government or another government this afternoon or next week, it matters not, I don't think. The issue of housing remains extremely prominent. This slide really can be encapsulated by a phrase called the single pipeline. If my chief exec was here, he speaks very fondly about it. It's about getting away from silos. You know, the mayor's just talked about not having any silos. I think historically the agency's had lots of silos with lots of rules attached to them. We're moving away from that so we can have a single conversation when we can have the right people in the room on issues about place, where we can drive initiatives, innovation and intervention in a collaborative manner and changing the way that we engage with our partners. In fact, the single pipeline, to quote my deputy chief exec, underpins the whole foundation of the agency. And again, our commitment isn't just about numbers and building homes. It's about working with smaller developers and larger developers in a sustained, diversified marketplace and building quality. And I think if we do just focus on the numbers and all we do in 5 years' time is deliver 300,000 homes a year, and that's all we do, it's probably an E- to a fail. You know, we've got to get the quality right, we've got to get the design right, we've got to get the places right. So the agency's changing. We've got a new leadership team at the top table. Well, new, Nick's been there a couple of years now, but we've got more directors coming in. And you'll see the way that we're engaging with the market change. And we're also making a clear point about actually not becoming relied upon. We'll intervene where we're needed. We'll not get involved where we're not. We'll not compete in the marketplace. We'll complement the market. And we'll stay as long as we're needed and where it's necessary, and then we'll get out. So we're very keen not to create a dependency that's unnecessary. This is a quote from my former chairman, who's now supporting the Prime Minister. Some key words in there. Bold and creative and thinking big. Again, similar language to the mayor earlier on. But I think that just demonstrates again the ambition of the agency in terms of what we're here to do. So town centres clearly facing a challenge, and this audience, I'm telling you things you already know, and significant challenges exist. That means we as an agency and as an industry need to adapt and change as well, and we're very keen that we go on this journey with you so that we can plan in advance how we can best support and intervene, what skills, expertise, funds, grants, whatever it might be from our side, can complement the skills and expertise that already exist in the regions and in the markets. Again, this slide, all very familiar to you. I'll not go through it, but it sort of supports the evidence base. Government likes evidence, MHCLG likes evidence. But I think on the back of evidence such as this, and the fact that I'm here today hopefully demonstrates to you that the agency is listening, does want to get to it, does want to get to being engaged with you. And the responses are coming. We've got the High Street Fund, we've got the Town Centres 2030, we've got planning reform consultation, and we've got the spending review. What we now need to do is, A, build on that, and also use the tools that are in Homes England's toolbox, be that money, be that our ability to facilitate meetings with the right partners, be that our powers. How do we best utilise what's in our toolbox and also add tools to our toolbox with the spending review perhaps? We're being challenged by the department to think bold in terms of how we can best address the issues. Having said we haven't got any silos, here's a few silos for you. This is just some of the financial tools that we have in our toolbox, some of them quite significant in terms of quantum. You've got the Home Building Fund, the Small Sites Fund, the Local Authority Accelerated Construction Fund, Heath, and the Land Assembly Fund. Some of it is grant, some of it's loan, some of it's repayable, some of it's not, some of it's us acquiring land. And using those financial levers, we delivered the outputs on the right in terms of 40,000 new homes, including significant affordable homes, and delivering new households into home ownership. Historically, you might have had to come to talk to us, and you probably still come to talk to us about Heath, but then you're not talking about LAAC or SSF. The purpose of the single pipeline is to have a single conversation with you all about what we can do, and let us worry about what silos, buckets, hoppers, the resources, the capital resources, grant, loan, or revenue comes from. But we can do other things as well. I've touched upon these already. We can support land assembly strategies. Town centres in particular, but not exclusively, often have multiple land ownerships, freeholds, leaseholds, rights and reservations. We can devise acquisition strategies with you to try and facilitate the most appropriate planning unit. We're quite good at getting the right people in the room at the senior level. I'm not saying others aren't, but there are often statutory consultees, other government departments. It can be a little bit difficult and wading through treacle sometimes to get the right person in the room for a proper conversation. So very simplistically, if that's all we're doing, that's all that's needed, then our work here is done. We are looking at how we can provide further capacity and capability support for local authorities who are already stretched. In particular, we're looking at that through the Local Authority Accelerated Construction and Small Sites Fund. But the principle of making sure that the planning authorities have the tools at their disposal to support these challenging times is fundamental. On larger sites, we are now acting as master developer, and we aim to be one of the key master developers in the country in our own right. So that's where the public sector take the risk in planning, take the risk in cost of strategic infrastructure. And infrastructure isn't just roads and sewers, it's that as well, but it's social infrastructure, it's open space, it's schools, it's education. How do you create that place, again quoting the mayor, as opposed to just laying bricks? We're very keen to facilitate and increase the pace of delivery through modern methods of construction and our disposal strategies. And we've touched upon our powers. We have quite extensive powers, as you'd expect for a government agency. Planning powers, compulsory purchase powers, urban development corporation powers, all at the discretion of the Secretary of State. And again, we need to think carefully in consultation how we best get those tools out of the toolbox. And the way to do that is to have a single conversation with the right people in the room. There's a theme developing here. So this comes back to my point about an E to an E minus to a fail if all we do is deliver 300,000 homes. We've got to do it quicker. We've got to use modern methods of construction because we haven't got the skills and the trades nor the bricks to do it at this scale anyway. Diversification here talks about the range of the companies, but it's also diversification of tenure and mix on sites. That links back into pace and also links back into place. How do we do things differently? How do we get the right affordable housing in the right places at the right time? And design, the thing that's often overlooked, it is about quality. We don't want to look back in 5-10 years and sort of wince at what's been built. So that's at the forefront here of everything that's being done in the agency. Just two or three examples of where we're actually doing it on different scales or about to do it. I'm not focused on it. I won't go through these in detail. You'll all have heard of them. But so you've got York Central. We bought our way into a partnership through land acquisition with Network Rail and York City Council and the York Railway Museum. Planning application has now been submitted and secured for 2,500 homes and quite a significant amount of commercial space and jobs. And again, that was enabled because we were able to go in and take a different view on land acquisition. Over a different timeline. Our drivers aren't an IRR or an return on capital employed. Our funding's different, so our drivers are about pace and quality and securing the right development at the right times. So we can invest in a different way. We're a different kind of a partner, And I'd like to think we could be the partner of choice, as opposed to people thinking we're a bit of a bureaucratic, dysfunctional government agency. We're a little bit bureaucratic, but we can move very fast when we need to. Example of that, our delegation from Treasury has actually just been trebled in the last few months. So our ability to invest in large, complex schemes and make decisions within the four walls of the agency without going to the department or Treasury, it's quite significant. Having said we don't do regeneration, here's a slide with regeneration on it. Scrub that delivery. But much smaller site, it's 800 units, it's 34,500 square foot of commercial. And again, we're there, we've got an interest in the land, and we're facilitating it. We're making sure that delivery is based upon quality and design. This is a slightly different one. It's the last one of the slides you'll be pleased to hear. This is a big site. This is 3,500 homes. This is a site the agency, the local authority had allocated for years and years and years. I think it's 5 landowners, 4 options, and 3 promotional companies. No one could make this site happen. We came in and took everybody out on the same day, single acquisition. We've now got an application in for 3,500 homes and a new town centre. Now, slightly different to the debate about existing town centres, but we need to be engaged with the people in the room to make sure that when we build this, we build it right and we don't replicate what's done in the past. So there's an awful lot of learning that we need to be doing now whilst we're still in the planning stage to inform and shape. Because this isn't the only one that we've got. We've got Northstowe as well, which is 7,500 homes. We've got probably about another half a dozen or so in the pipeline for this year of between 3,000 and 5,000 homes. So with 3,000 and 5,000 homes comes new centres, new schools, new social infrastructure. So we need to make sure that we're engaged with the retailers and the developers to inform and shape our thinking so that we can create new town centres that we're proud of and that actually work. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, if I could invite up the panel, please. I'll take this seat on the end. Well, hopefully you took away from that a renewed impression of what Homes England's all about. I think speaking for myself, I always thought that Homes England were there to get flats built where there was no business case to get them built because the affordability didn't stack up, and it's a very, very different organisation to that. And the toolkit they have, not just money, it's not just about the money, the toolkit they have for assisting us in the built environment of delivery, I find very, very interesting indeed. The idea of, being that big brother to go and talk to government bodies about release. Critical friend. The idea of trying to solve some of the intractable problems around complex development sites by using CPO powers. I think there's some very strong things we can go at there. Right, so this is a fabulous, fabulous panel we have here. No less than 3 CEOs. I'm going to very quickly run through them, and then we can get on with the questions, because I've got a lot of good questions, and I know there's questions from the audience. We are doing this in a question time style debate. I do have a few people in the audience who have questions to ask, so if I call your name out, hopefully you're here and not having a meeting next door and having forgotten about it, but if you could stand up, it will help the guys with microphones get to you more quickly. Right, so Simon, next up is Karen Whelan, who's the CEO of Surrey Heath Council, who is well known in the industry as an advocate of local authorities being very interventionist in their town centres, and we can talk about that. Next we have Barry Jessop, who's a director at First Base, who are a mixed-use developer. I was told off by his office for describing First Base as residential developers, so we can investigate the difference shortly.
He's done it again.
Next up, we have Jace Terrell from the one and only New West End company. Now, it's interesting because there's not an awful lot of resi at the moment in the West End, but we can talk about why and what they're going to do about that. And by no means least, we have Ian Anderson, good Oxford Poly lad, a planner who runs Iceni. So let's crack on. So I'll open with a question to Barry, so speaking to this point. So, when your office was telling me off, clearly it's a bad thing to just be a residence developer. You're a mixed-use developer. So what are the other uses that make you a mixed-use developer, and what does that add to the core business of residential?
Well, I think we've always been mixed-use developers, and I think the reason for that is because mono-use developments typically don't work. Now, we've had a period of time where we've seen perhaps a focus on mono-use developments, whether it's very large office parks or shopping centres or housing estates, but none of those have really survived the test of time. The places that people enjoy are the high streets, and the reason people enjoy the high streets is because you create a better and longer lasting experience. So to answer the question, we believe very much in an 18-7 type approach. Most of the favourite places that I suspect the audience would have in the world will be places that are active 7 days a week, probably 18 hours a day. So you need a mixture of uses. So housing, we think, has a really important role to play in bringing some activity and regeneration to the high street. But equally, you need to complement that with the experiences that people are after. Now, there's not much rocket science here, and a lot of this is being said today, but people do want the independent shops. People do want the cafes, the workspaces. They want the element of surprise that you get in the most exciting urban environments. So what we try to do is embed all of those uses on day one into those schemes, and by doing that, you can create a place that people want to come to, and if people come to it, it's active, it has a chance of being sustainable.
Fantastic. And that sort of neatly leads into sort of Jay. So you've got the other end of the spectrum almost, so everything but residential. So, a couple of questions really. A, how do you create a sense of community without residential? Because that's often the definition of community is the people who live there. But also, do you have plans to bring more residential into the West End?
Yeah, so we're a business partnership, so Bond, Oxford and Regent Street, you're right, there's very few residential on those frontages, although we are part of a neighbourhood with 25,000 residents in that wider area, and they're a very important mix to us. They're our customers, they're also our employees into our businesses. But actually, I think the local authority, the London plan, they've all recognised that what we need to create in the centre of London is more mixed use in the broader sense. A lot of it talked about already this morning. And that does mean looking at the West End and Mayfair again specifically and saying, well, actually, what do we need to put into the built environment there? Do we need more mixed use tenure? I think it's quite striking when you look at the West End, you have the highest value residential real estate and property in the country, and you have about 30-40% of social housing. And actually that bit in the middle is a huge challenge for us. And I think also what's been recognised through our work with the local authority and planning policy is creating no longer A1 frontages on every bit of the high street on Bond, Oxford and Regent Street, but really changing the mix of that. And I have to say, looking at local authorities, A1 is the most prescriptive policy use in the country. So it's good that they're taking a fresh approach, and hopefully we'll see more of that around the country.
Fantastic. Ian, look at the end there. There is a lot of urban regeneration going on. A lot of cranes you see up in London at the moment, but mistakes are being made. And I'm not saying this with any judgment on my own behalf, but just looking at my own Twitter feed, 9 Elms, for example, is getting a fair bit of abuse about what's going on there. You may or may not agree with that as a statement, but what are the mistakes that you see being made in urban regeneration, residential-led development?
So I'm going to take that as 2 questions in one, which I like. So on Vauxhall 9 Elms, and I say this as much as a Londoner, as a Wandsworth resident, as much as a planner, I think that's potentially an example of where, when you're in a housing crisis and we talk about numbers, that quantity can often become the overriding issue over quality. And as I say, as a Londoner, as a Wandsworth resident, I'd always question whether there's a need for that many of one type of housing product in one location, and whether actually it'd have been better if it was planned to provide a broader mix of residential. So I'm taking that as question 1.
Good.
And then in terms of question 2, examples of poor practice, so take your words, more a kind of a thought for how that could materialise into poor practice. I think as a starting point for what we're all here for, it's absolute rule number 1, it's taking the time to think. It's taking the time to properly understand what the community thinks, what the businesses think, what the retailers that have moved out think, what the retailers that might want to move back in think. Properly taking the time to understand what communities think and feel about their area. And I give you one example. The unintended consequences of pedestrianisation. Now, to me, the reasons for pedestrianisation when we were planning stocking great big shopping centres with huge floor plates was about getting the traffic on the outside of a town, limiting the number of servicing movements that come into a town. And as a consequence, you created these citadels, these centres which had a ring road, and then it was all about big floor plates moving people through. And it could be very easy to assume if you're replanning your town centres that stays, and then you plan on the similar building blocks. And I would question whether that's right, whether actually it's right to look back at why that was brought and use that as the basis for change. Because actually bringing the right movement through towns, a bit like Barry was saying, to accentuate the fact that we're looking at plan on centres that work from 6 in the morning till midnight, not 9 till 5. Actually, getting movement through is not a bad thing. So that's an example for me as how we just look at making sure we don't fall into easy mistakes.
This does beg the question of Jace. You're talking about pedestrianising Oxford
Yes.
Street. So what do you think of that?
It's like Brexit or pedestrianising Oxford Street are the two questions often on panels. I mean, it's quite interesting. I'm sure people have followed it not as closely as us, but the pedestrianisation of Oxford Street, every mayor has called for it. It had a lot of hiatus last year when there was some big plans, a lot of capital for it. We've moved away from that, and I mean, I think the focus now is about a zero-emission district and recognising actually commercial districts, town centres do need an element of traffic, but actually what comes into that, and actually Oxford Street is one of the most polluted streets in Europe still, needs to be zero emissions and really fast tracking that. And I think it's definitely a tilt in terms of public policy and also what property owners and occupiers need to do to move pretty fast on that actually, because we know customers, employees, occupiers will choose where they go in towns and cities based on the approach to sustainability. So I think zero emission Oxford Street rather than pedestrianised Oxford Street is the future.
Great. Same with Karen. So, you're quite high profile for investing heavily in your town centre.
Yes.
To do that, you've had to buy an awful lot of retail.
Yes.
Now, I'm guessing that your vision for Camberley Town Centre is not purely retail.
No.
So,
And I think it's been well documented, hasn't it, that we, as a local authority, decided that we wanted to carry out a major redevelopment of our town centre in Camberley. And we've had that vision for a considerable period of years. And I think we got to the stage where in 2016, when we were trying to work a partnership approach to that redevelopment with lots of landowners in our town centre, that we felt that there was a real difficulty in being able to move that forward as quickly as we would like. And so we did take, and it's been well documented, that we took the very bold approach, which was to acquire all of our assets within our town centre development. And it was very purely to gain that control. And so what we found through using our prudential borrowing powers to actually acquire all of those assets, we have now moved in the lot, and we've only owned it, I think, for nearly 3 years. But in those 3 years, we've then managed to deliver our town centre proposals really, really quickly. So we've, completed all the refurbishment of the shopping centre. We've managed as well to gain entry into lots of funding streams because of the strategic approach that we've taken. So we've got £4.5 million worth of grant funding from our LEP. We've got a considerable amount of grant funding from our One Public Estate partners. And by having that very, structured sort of strategic approach to what we want to deliver in our town centre, it's meant that we've been able to move very quickly. But what it's also meant that because we're hearing in the press nearly every day about the changes and the difficulties and the challenges, what the control of those assets means is we can actually move more. We're much more fluid. We're able to move more flexibly. But the other benefit that's coming through just in the last year is how we can use all of those assets now to actually connect with our core service delivery. So when we're starting to look at how do we deliver the best health and well-being function, if you like, for our community, we can look to our assets in the town centre and we can say, well, actually, we can work with our private sector, we can work with the Boots, we can work with Holland & Barrett, we can provide great healthcare facilities working across private and public facilities just by creating health and well-being hubs. And we can repurpose a lot of our assets, if you like, to help people like, the independents, the artisans. For us, it's about what do the community want. It's very much about understanding our community needs, and because we're very close to understanding that community, we are able to respond to those needs. And I think for us, it means we've got some excellent opportunity to actually sustain our town centres. And we're keeping, we're about 2.9% voids in our town centre in a really difficult climate. We've secured our development partner for a multi-million pound, £200 million development already. Those things were not happening in 6 years, but they've happened in 3. And for us, it's about that control and being able to deal with those assets and move with the times as the times move as well. So, quick situation of where we are.
Fantastic, thank you. I suppose, Simon, this is an interesting point. So to get control of her town centre, Karen bought a shopping centre. So to deliver substantial amounts of residential within town centres, you might have to buy some shopping centres, and I think there's 1 or 2 people in the audience who might want to sell a couple. Would you actually genuinely consider investing in a big commercial asset like a shopping centre to facilitate that?
Where there is a clear rationale for us to do so, yes, because we're spending public money. So again, we're not here to replicate and duplicate the market, so we will go where others can't or won't. So I think, what we will certainly do, we'll have the conversation, and there will be instances where actually taking freehold interest of the asset at a point in time is the right thing to do because others can't move in that space. As I said in the speech earlier on, we're not driven by an IRR or a return on capital employed, but we are driven by value for money, state aid and procurement rules. So we just need to understand what's the rationale. Is there a clear and robust reason for us to involve in the acquisition, be that through negotiation or be that through compulsory acquisition? And also what are the other tools that we can bring to bear, because they're quite numerous in terms of how we can get involved. But in principle, yes, but it's a yes but. And each case we'll have a look at, but that doesn't mean it goes into into Whitehall for months and months of indecision. This Prime Minister and whoever's in number 10 in the coming weeks and months, it'll be the same. The pressure to actually do stuff and not have indecision by committee is significant. The agency is being put under immense pressure to actually get stuff done. So it starts with a plan and a red line and a conversation and the right people in the room, and my commitment to everybody here is we will have those conversations with you, and if there's a clear rationale for us getting involved, then that's what we'll do.
So the simple answer was yes, and try and form an orderly queue as Simon tries to escape.
You paraphrase somewhat.
Fantastic. Look, I'd like to throw open some questions that I know are going to come from the audience. So I'd first off like to invite Stefano Faella of 360 Architects, please, to ask a question. If I mention your name, if you stand up, it will make it a lot easier for the guys to pick you out.
Thank you. Generally for the panel, I suppose, I've written this, if I can read it. One of the challenges we're facing in terms of, I suppose, in the retail environment, the high street, the repurposing of assets, and one of the big challenges from the private sector is that the financial model as it stands to do anything with these sites is really difficult. Loads of abnormal costs, whether it's for demolitions, whether it's for renegotiating deals or whatever it is. Is it the private sector that needs to rethink its financial model? Is it the public sector that can help us do that? How do we bridge that gap, I suppose, in these challenges?
I suppose, exactly, if I could direct that the two of you in a way. So, Karen, have you used any of this grant funding to enable work, or is that how you see grant funding working?
Yeah, I think one of the beauties of owning your own assets as a local authority is, your return very much to your community. If they're our shareholders, for example, it's a much wider community balance that you need to make. So it isn't just about return in a commercial sense. It's about what are the wider community benefits that we're also bringing to place. And so what we're finding, certainly in the private sector, that very much your investment approach is about the percentage return that you need to give back to your shareholders, and that often that affects, if you like, the ability to be able to deliver some of those sites. For us, yes, it is about making sure that if we're borrowing money for example, through prudential borrowing, that we can service those loans. But bear in mind, those service costs are actually incredibly useful for us in terms of they're quite low. And so that helps us deliver some hugely valuable and different and innovative approaches in terms of how we then repurpose sites. And what that does mean is we can take, for example, using our economic growth function, we can say, well, okay, if there are businesses out there, very small businesses that are struggling, but actually they need a space, then we can work those very sort of community-style rates with them. We can help deliver space to, artisans and independents at a very low rate, because we would rather, and the community would tell us, they would rather have those spaces occupied than vacant. So there's a lot of flexibility then that we can bring in to those deals, simply because we're not caught by a kind of private sector, this is how much the shareholder needs as a return. And our return is much wider. It's about what are we giving back to the community in terms of those uses, experiences that we talk about, but also understanding place.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think to answer the question, it's probably a cocktail of initiatives to try and find a way forward. There are various grants that Homes England has where it facilitates the delivery of homes. I touched upon the LAAC and the SSF, so the Local Authority Accelerated Construction Fund and Small Sites Fund. We do love our acronyms in government. Those are funds primarily to go towards public sector asset owners to provide, and I won't bore you with the details of the two, but it's to fund infrastructure, and it is grants. It is available up to the 31st of March 2021. Do come and talk to me, because it's real money, that if it's compliant with the rules, because there's always a rule book, we can move very, very quickly on those funds to support local initiatives. But we also have debt finance as well. I'm not an expert on debt finance within the agency, but colleagues of mine are. And whilst our rates might not be much different, we can be much more patient in terms of when we get our money out. So the money can either be rolled from scheme to scheme, or it can be rolled towards the back end when the scheme can afford it. So that just helps with that peak cash and risk profile, coming back to your point about different drivers and KPIs. So we can act differently because we're governed differently, but put together in a collaborative way, then it's something that might help.
Mark, can I just give a private sector sort of response to that as well? Because I think there will definitely be some examples when these opportunities have to be public sector led. I think there are others where the help, particularly of Homes England, will be incredibly valuable, potentially in assembling site and or unlocking some infrastructure elements in particular. But there are plenty of other opportunities. I don't think the private sector can derelict its duties here. There are plenty of other opportunities which currently aren't being developed where the private sector can lead on these redevelopments. Now, there are probably 2 or 3 things we find we need for that to happen. One, we actually need a critical mass, because usually these developments, if they're going to be significant, take time. Yes. You can only really justify time in the private sector if you've got sufficient critical mass to underpin that. Secondly, you need a collaborative local authority from a planning perspective. That's key as well. But thirdly, if you do both of those things and you are looking at genuine mixed-use developments, then you can unlock a lot of opportunities that have stayed locked. It goes back to my point previously. If you look historically, people were either house builders or office developers or shopping centre asset managers, and you tended to find that all of those categories acted in isolation. And the resi developer wouldn't build his homes because the environment wasn't very nice, and the shopping centre manager wouldn't invest in their retail because there wasn't enough footfall, and the office market had dried up. What we find is if we can combine those sites into a single comprehensive regeneration, they all become viable because we become masters of our own destiny. So I think there is still a very important role for the private sector to play.
But Barry,
please.
The property sector is still far too monocultural. Yeah. I suspect if you were to do a show of hands in this room today, there wouldn't be that many Barrys here. And I don't mean Barry specifically, I like the name Barry, but in terms of representing that mixed-use developer, there's probably not enough people. We had this conversation last year, and similarly, if you're at one of the residential conferences, I wonder how many people from this room would be there. Yeah. And we've got to get much better at working across land uses. Until we do that, we will continue to come back to big problems.
Yeah, Jason?
I just want to do a plug for the bid industry in the property world, because actually it's the public realm and public space. And one of the challenges we have, there's 90 different owners on Bond Street, 120 different owners on Oxford Street of all different types, the great estates, the private propcos and the private owners. And actually, there's only 2 property owner bids in the UK, and I think there's a desire to bring more property owner bids into play with the occupier bids. And we've done a really good job in leveraging private capital into the public realm. About £200 million we've secured with the public sector and the private sector because we brought the property owners together to do these big public realm schemes. So really that model should be looked to be replicated in other big cities around the UK. And I know the government's looking at property owner bids, but certainly from our example, having that in place for the last 4 years, we've been able to leverage private capital into public realm schemes.
I just want to make one point about grant funding, and that is often when you're applying for grants, you have to be able to deliver those developments within a very short space of time to get grant funding. Bear in mind some of the work that we're doing and what people are saying here on the stage. You know, our kind of development that we're doing takes a long time to deliver, and therefore I'd like to see grant funding available for a much longer scale project and take that, a big chance on us to actually deliver for you, rather than looking for quick returns on investment.
But likewise, Karen, a 3-year planning consent's not much help on a 20-year development programme. You know, so we do keep coming back against these issues. You get to the end of 1 year and then you're thinking about, do we need to get a new planning permission again?
Exactly, yeah.
Very good, okay. Right, I'd like to invite John Compson of CMS, a solicitor, to ask a question. There he is in the middle, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Simon, first of all, good to hear your very positive can-do message about Homes England. Question directed largely to you. Is Homes England embracing the desire for PRS, co-living space within town centres? And how do you see that changing the dynamic of residential development? So, for example, does PRS, co-living, mean a greater long-term commitment to the likes of placemaking?
Yes, we're committed. I think it's part of a broader diversity point and pace point and quality point that I made earlier on. We're committed to delivery of homes in all its guises and all its tenures in a way that is done at speed but not at the compromise of quality. We're doing that. We're trying to actively do that in the land that we dispose of. We currently own 8,500 hectares in new money. What's that? 20,000 acres and a bit in old money. And we're divesting that, and we're looking at ways how we attract PRS and other tenures into that process, and also getting the smaller house builders on board and the registered providers. So it's part of a bigger agenda for Homes England, because we carry on doing it the same old way and the top 6 house builders on our panel buy another site, then nothing happens in any different form. So we're open to ideas as to how we can do that, but it does mean a greater commitment to placemaking, but that's a fundamental principle of what the agency is trying to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, Barry, you know, the sort of mixed-use developments you're doing, how does placemaking, I mean, I don't mean just building a place, I mean the ongoing activation of that space, how does that work for your business?
It's crucial. So it's all about long-term curation. We actually talk about curation of space over a long period of time. We'd ideally like to control the estates, which might include hotels, residential offices, etc., probably in a similar way to the way that the West End works, so that you can curate those spaces over time. But I think that's the point about the residential, the different types, is very interesting. I think the question I was asked at the beginning was the different types of uses you'd like to put into a high street. The reality is all of those different residential uses have a role to play, and it's the criticism perhaps of Nine Elms is around the fact that the demographic of the person who lives and has bought in Nine Elms will be very narrow. And I think the opportunity that high streets have in particular is to attract a broad range. You know, people think that co-living and build to rent naturally attracts the postgrads, the 20-year-olds. There definitely is an attraction for that sector. But equally, it can attract more elderly people. You know, it can attract downsizers, it can attract single person households who actually are otherwise isolated in their communities. So there are lots of opportunities to actually bring in a range of residential products here, which are much more sustainable rather than having a mono use approach.
Cool. Well, it's not just about residential, so can I invite John Sullivan of Light Cinema to ask his question? John, are you in the room? Dun, dun, dun. Right, that's a letting to Everyman Cinema I'm going to do down on the south coast that I'm looking to let at the moment. Okay. Heath, what John was going to ask was about the role that leisure can play. And then actually, I was going to sort of morph it into a bit of a question about is there a conflict between leisure and residential, particularly to Jace, because you know you can see tensions arising around that, and maybe Karen as well.
I mean, I think there's no secret that retail's changing, and actually there's more leisure. And you look at the Oxford Street BHS example. You know, we've got Swingers Golf open in there now. We've got 45,000 square feet independent restaurateur opening on the first floor next month. So there's definitely been a shift into more leisure occupiers. I think the challenge we've always had with the local authority is the planning policy is not linked to the licensing policy, and the evening economy is different to the nighttime economy, and actually how do you join that all together to create a leisure economy to support the retail, the office and the commercial. Quite interesting though, there's different types of uses coming into the area, so health as well and others, but I think the challenge a lot of the time is getting the planning committee and the councillors and some of those officers to rethink their approach to some of this and actually get them on the streets and show them what's happening and what customers want ultimately, and that's a big challenge actually, and not just unique probably to the West End as well.
Do you want me to go? I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? My feeling with a town centre environment is that it does have to have that vibrancy. And so I think you do have to look to provide, you know, a useful relationship, if you like, and one that works between the residential community and obviously the entertainment space that you are going to have in town centres. I think one of the things we always say to residents that if you are going to live in a town centre environment, then you have to expect it to be vibrant. I take your point. I've had a lot of people say to me about making sure that the licensing arrangements are in line with your planning policies as well, and I think it's absolutely vital now in terms of the sustainability of town centres that actually those are better aligned. And I think sometimes with some of our provisions, it's about looking at our legislation, because bear in mind, local authorities don't make this legislation, but they do somehow have to try and deliver it in a changing environment now that is changing so quickly that the legislation hasn't kept up with it. So I think it is a plea back to government, which is saying, please align, you know, some of this legislation so that we can actually, again, help promote and sustain our town centres, our district centres, you know, our villages and so on, so that we can actually make sure that we have a sustainable community place for people for the future.
I'm just going to take it a step further. I think it's a non-negotiable, because apart from anything else, the most precious commodity we have in this country is land, and yet we utilise it massively inefficiently. You know, we have offices that are occupied 35% of the time, residential is about 37, retail is about 50, I think. So there are lots of spaces, there are public realm investments that are made that aren't sweated. In no other sort of sector would we have these massively valuable assets that only get used for very small periods of time. So we have to find more efficient ways of multiply using these spaces. It's absolutely crucial, and we just need to make sure that legislation and the communication with the community is strong enough to allow us to support that.
And it's not a magic bullet any more than residential is a magic bullet. It has to be the right leisure for the right town.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it needs to be properly treated at ground floor level, because the one thing I think we need to be careful about leisure, like any use, you know, one of the great things about shopping, it's in a sense, it's free at source, in the sense you go into the shop, and you can walk around, you can feel it's yours. If you choose to buy, that's another matter. We don't want to have too many uses that put blockages at the front door. you've got to let the community feel they're welcome into those spaces. So public space, civic space, which can be used for a variety of purposes through the day and night, to my mind, is just as important as some of those buildings that we're talking about.
Okay, and if that entertainment and that leisure is free as well to your local, your local community, I mean, it's just another way of people getting out into the town centres and actually enjoying it. And lots of families struggle, when they've got to take 4 kids somewhere. It's about how do we make sure that we've got these spaces that do entertain, 24/7 and actually are vibrant. And that means that, residential development does have to sit alongside that and work.
I think we've got literally about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask one more question from the audience. And apologies to the other people who very kindly proffered questions. But Sarah Boonham from Leeds, at the front here, fantastic.
Please.
Now, I would say Sarah's a cost consultant, but she's more turning into a repurposing guru covering everything at the moment, so that's a great question.
For the kind words.
She's buying me dinner tonight, by the way.
Very good, Brian. There's much talk of remodelling our towns and cities to create exciting and dynamic places in which to live, to shop, to work, to visit, offering that sustainable and vibrant community we've heard mentioned already. I'd be really interested to hear the panel's views on 2 points, if I may. I think the first one may be better targeted at Barry. Sorry about that, Barry. So how do we avoid creating what I call the new blueprint for development and the creation of more and more clone towns which aren't relevant to the identity of the area? And secondly, and maybe one for Karen, what is the single most important factor in the successful visioning and delivery of those sustainable destinations?
So very quickly, I think everybody dislikes the homogenous high streets we see. I think we know wherever you come from in the country, your town or city has its own unique characteristics. Every development vision has to start from there, has to start with the heritage and the history of that location. It then has to grow as quickly as it can organically. That is the challenge we always have, because organic takes time. Development doesn't have time. You want it to happen quickly, but that's where you start. You have to sow the seeds, and then you just cultivate them very, very quickly. So you make every town centre and city based on a slightly different bag of seeds, if you want to call them that, but you make sure you use the same approach to allow them to grow as organically, as quickly as possible.
I think for me the most important issue around sustaining town centres, and particularly for us, is we really do have to listen to the local community that will use it the most. And so the first most important thing, and it goes back to understanding your place and understanding what people want and what people need. But for goodness sake, when you're building these places, the best examples that we've delivered in Camberley over the last few years, they have come from the community. And because they come from the community will support them. And I think it is about how do we work to understand what our community needs, how do we all then help to deliver those places? Because actually, everyone says to me, we don't want to go anywhere else. We'd rather have these facilities on our front doorstep. Nobody wants to keep travelling. So listen to our community, see what our community wants, and help deliver that. After all, they're the ones that are absolutely directly investing in that place.
Final brief point. Sustainability is obviously environmental, social and economic, and the Crown Estate are doing a fantastic job on this, but actually we've got another 400 owners right across our district. So we're going to launch, I think, one of the first in the UK Sustainable District Charters next year, which is what occupiers, owners and government at all levels and bids or town centre managers can do together. But actually, I think the encouragement and the call here is for owners of real estate to not just think about their building in terms of environmental sustainability, but actually place-based sustainability and looking at the whole geographic area and what needs to be done more there, because I think it's very narrow at the moment. Clearly, looking at your building, actually you need to look wider as well.
Yeah, I mean, Karen actually stole my thunder a bit in the sense that I agree. I think it's all about people. That's the key thing, it's about the local people. And two link points to that. Be careful of the unintended creep of Anglo-Saxon middle-class master planning tendencies. You've got to work with the people that are there. How many sketches do you see that people look like us? and all of those lifestyle images on schemes. Is that actually what those communities want? You've got to take the community with you, otherwise they'll move out, they won't use it.
Yeah.
And the second is, by all means, put as many coffee shops in from the big boys as you like, but make it an obligation that they have to stay open until 11 o'clock at night. Because when I walk past them shutting up at 7 o'clock because it suits them, that is soul destroying. And they're prime units, and they should be capable of using that space for other purposes from 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock.
Very final question, maybe a point of reflection for Simon, who started. So, this is your first Revo Conference, your first sort of exposure to the wider community. Has it been a worthwhile trip for you?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to be doing it more often, and not just here, across England. And it's, the Revo brand is fantastic. We need to be talking more. We need to be talking more openly and be able to have honest conversations with each other. We're not here to compete. We're here to help. We can't do what we need to do on our own, and the private sector needs the support of the public sector more often than not. So I'm a simple chap, as anybody who knows me will tell you. It all starts in a room with a plan and an ask, and then we can have that conversation. So thank you for the invitation. It's been immensely worthwhile from my point of view, and look forward to next year.
Thank you. Well, the sign of a successful panel is A, when I only get through about half the questions, and secondly, when I'm so busy listening to what they're saying, I forget that I've got to ask a question, both of which happened this afternoon. So I'm sure you'd like to join me in thanking the panel for their great contribution.
Thank you.